one of the biggest Supreme Court cases about abortion, about Obamacare, and about how far our government can reach into our lives and force us to violate our consciences. It's being argued in front of the highest court in the land. The case involves the Health and Human Services mandate that requires everybody, even Christian colleges and universities, Catholic nuns, and religious hospitals, to provide birth control, abortion-inducing drugs, and sterilization services to their employees as part of the mandated health insurance coverage. These individuals and organizations are obviously arguing that this violates their religious liberty because contraception, abortion, and sterilization violate their religious beliefs. And right now, the government's forcing them to either violate their consciences or violate the law. Take a look.
Under the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare, most forms of contraception for employees must be covered at no cost. This provision has come under fire from religious organizations that oppose birth control or consider things like the morning after pill to be abortifacients, substances that induce abortion.
As Baptists, standing up for the right of the unborn, standing up for the right to life. This is an area that is important enough to say, we simply can't comply with the law the way it is written.
That law is the Obama administration's HHS mandate, which requires Oklahoma Baptist University to provide access to abortion-inducing drugs as part of the school's health care plan.
Joining me now is Legal Communications Director for Alliance Defending Freedom, Kerri Kupec. Kerri, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
Kerri, tell us, this is one of the biggest cases against Obamacare since the individual mandate was upheld, right?
That's right.
What ruling do you expect? Tell me a little bit about the arguments, what you expect from the Supreme Court.
Sure. Well, this case really comes down to one principle. All Americans should be free to peacefully live and operate according to their beliefs without threat of government punishment. But unfortunately, this case is calling that very American foundational principle into question. Will religious institutions be allowed by the government to continue to operate as religious institutions? And we at Alliance Defending Freedom represent 5 colleges and universities. These are evangelical schools, and right now the Obama administration is forcing these schools to carry drugs like the morning after pill and the week after pill in their insurance plans for their employees and their faculty and staff and students. And obviously, these kinds of life-ending drugs and devices violate their faith and their conscience and Christianity's teaching on the sacredness of life. And so they now face crippling fines in the millions of dollars that call into question the very existence and their future simply for just being who they've always been.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about these colleges, but first, do you expect them to comply with this mandate, or are they going to keep exercising their religious liberty regardless of the law?
Well, these schools are really sticking to their guns, and they're standing for truth, and they're standing for religious liberty, and that's because it's who they are. For instance, let's take it Geneva College. That's one of the schools before the court. This is a school that from its inception has been an active advocate for human flourishing, for human life. In fact, the students themselves there assisted slaves on the Underground Railroad. This school was among the first in the country to admit women into their full-time program, to employ women. These schools in Oklahoma and Geneva, they're all involved in incredible things like fighting sex trafficking, clean water initiatives in third world countries. These schools are driven and inspired by the teachings of their faith. And it's tragic that the government has forced them to go to the Supreme Court and beg for their very basic civil rights to continue to be able to do the very good that they do in our world.
Right, they should be allowed to exercise their religious beliefs however they so choose, as long as it doesn't violate someone else's. But tell me about this specific issue here, because there are a lot of things wrong with Obamacare. We don't have time to go into all those things. The mandate itself, a lot of people have an issue with. I have an issue with. But this isn't just even the birth control aspect of that. These colleges have an issue, and please correct me if I'm wrong, with the specific birth control pills or abortion-inducing pills that end a life, not just prevent conception, correct?
That's right. In fact, these schools, all of their insurance plans, they carry 16 of the 20 FDA-approved birth control drugs and devices. So these 5 schools only take issue with 4 things. That's the morning after pill, the week after pill, and 2 IUDs. These are all drugs and devices that the FDA themselves have said that can cause the destruction of an embryo. So again, for the government to force these schools to provide drugs and devices that violate their conscience it's un-American and it's unconstitutional.
All right, so right now this is in front of the Supreme Court. A ruling won't be issued until later this spring. But what do you expect from them? Who do you expect to come on each side? What arguments do you expect to be the most convincing ones? And then what ruling do you ultimately expect?
Well, I would certainly hope the Supreme Court to follow their own precedent that they decided in the Hobby Lobby Conestoga Woods decision, which said that, look, a religious family business can operate as a religious family business. And there are a couple of really interesting things about this case. For starters, this mandate does not apply to Pepsi and Exxon, multi-billion-dollar corporations. They were grandfathered out of this. So this mandate doesn't apply to them. It doesn't apply to the family plans for the U.S. Army, which is the world's largest employer. So there are millions of women who are currently not getting the drugs and devices that this government is demanding that the Little Sisters of the Poor, that these colleges and universities distribute against their faith and conscience. And the reality is the government has a solution if they want to follow it. They can make these drugs and devices available in the state health exchanges that they themselves have set up. They could, in fact, if they wanted to, they could create a contraception plan that women could go within their state and get. And the fact that they haven't, and the fact that they have exempted these big businesses around the country, I think it's pretty obvious the government's motive here. They are determined to punish people of faith and people of conscience and make them comply with something that violates the very essence of who they are.
Right, I want to drill into something that you just said, though, and that's these exemptions. This seems unbelievable to me that these enormous corporations, and like you said, the United States Army, which is a very large employer, that they're exempt from this contraception or this abortion mandate when the little guys, these Christian colleges, aren't. So first of all, how did that happen? How did they get these exemptions?
Yeah, it's a complicated system that the government has devised. No surprise there. A series of bureaucratic decisions deciding who gets a free pass and the fact that religious people don't. But what's interesting is that the government right now is saying, look, we are accommodating these religious institutions and schools. We're actually giving them a pass, and it's in the sign of a form. But the reality is this so-called accommodation is a joke. What it essentially is a permission slip for the government to come in and use these institutions' insurance plans for the government to distribute these drugs. So basically they're asking these Christian colleges and universities to sign a form to essentially be the government's drug mule and still distribute these drugs against their conscience and their faith.
So it's almost a trick then. It's what we originally thought when they were crafting Obamacare, that it's really all just a ploy to make this system as hard to use as possible so that it eventually shifts by necessity from the private sector to the government taking over our health care. What a mess. Kerri, I appreciate you coming on the show tonight. I hope you'll come back and continue to update us on this case.